Hello and welcome to the Middle East Report. This program today will be discussing the forthcoming Israeli general election. And on Tuesday, the 22nd of January, the Israelis go to the polls to decide who will be their next prime minister and who will be their next government. It looks very likely, if the polls are correct, that we're going to see Benjamin Netanyahu come to power again after being elected 3 times as the Prime Minister of Israel. And whatever his government or whatever government he forms, Israel faces major challenges. Those include the threat of a nuclear Iran, as Iran steps ever closer to developing nuclear weapons, which threatens to be a game changer in the Middle East. There's also the pressure on the Middle East peace process, in which the Palestinian Authority have declared a Palestinian state through the UN, which has really threatened the viability of the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Plus also Israel's neighborhood has changed over the last 4 years thanks to the Arab Spring that has seen dangerous Islamist groups like the Muslim Brotherhood come to power. It's also the civil war in Syria as well has meant that Israelis have become skeptical about peace in the Middle East. And so whatever challenges Israel face, one thing remains, that Israel is a beacon of light in a growing region that's becoming darker and darker by the day. In this program today, I'm joined by David Mencer, who is the former director of LFI, which is a Labour Friends of Israel. And I am also joined by Zami Ufsendorfer, the chairman of Likud Harut in the UK. Gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to both have you on the program for this election special. And Zami, just want to ask you a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in Israeli politics, and why did you choose to represent the party of the current Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, the Likud party?
I am a son of a Holocaust survivor. My father was in the concentration camp at the age of 19, and I kind of shielded myself from anything to do with the Nazi era because of that. But I went to Auschwitz for the Israeli Air Force flypast some years ago. Many you probably would have heard about it. So I decided to go on my own, and it was a revelation for me. It was a most stirring experience, as it would be for anyone, but to want to wrap yourself up with the Israeli flag that was at the end of the railhead is something that I will never forget. And I came back and started writing about Zionism. I started looking at everything through the prism of the Holocaust. Admire very, very much Menachem Begin, the founder of the Likud party, and it's gone along from there.
Excellent. And you've got a story to share, which I'm sure many of our viewers would like, about Menachem Begin. He came to power, didn't he, in 1977?
Yes. It was because of this being an evangelical channel. He came to Washington after winning the election as Prime Minister, after being all of his life in opposition. And there was a press conference, and most of the world's press were quite well disposed to him, except for one of the left-wing Israeli papers, which asked him, Mr. Prime Minister, you're the most religious Prime Minister Israel's had in all of its history, and yet the majority of your program here in the United States is to meet evangelical groups. I think he was meeting Billy Graham and so forth at the time. Do you not realize that the interest of the Christians is to bring the Messiah, and that the Messiah can only come if the Jews are resettled in their homeland? And without skipping a beat, Mr. Begin said, if the Christians will help us in the Congress today, we will help them when the Messiah comes.
I like that. That's great. It's a fantastic quote. And David Mensah, you also represented and were the head of a very good organisation called Labour Friends of Israel. My own personal experience of dealing with LFI had been very good because back in 2009 I worked with Labour Friends of Israel with an excellent Israeli organisation called Impact SE, and what their task was, they monitor the whole national curriculum education of the Arab world, and in this particular case they were looking at the Hamas education system, and we met with some very prominent Labour MPs who were very, very keen, and through the help of LFI got this report and material into the hands of ministers. So I know that they're doing a very good job. But can you explain to our viewers how you got involved in politics and how you got involved in parliamentary politics representing Israel and the Labour Party?
Simon, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here. I remember very well from scriptures what God says to Abraham near the beginning of the book of Genesis, where he blesses Abraham to become his offspring, will become a great nation. And he also says very clearly, God says, whoever blesses you, I will bless. Whoever curses you, I will curse. So I would like to say, firstly, thank you very much to your viewers, to the supporters of Israel and the Jewish people amongst the Christian community. The support is absolutely invaluable. We need it now more than ever. And the fact that you are standing up to understanding, learning more about Israel's unique position in the Middle East is something which is very, very welcome. And for so many years, the Jewish people and Israel have been isolated in the world amongst the nations. And to know that there are a group of people who are willing to go that extra mile to contact politicians, to make sure that there is a wider understanding of Israel's unique position in the Middle East is very, very welcome. In terms of how I got involved in this work, I've been passionate about politics since I've been a teenager. I did politics in university. I went to work in the Labour Party. I'm a passionate Labour Party member. And when an opportunity came to marry my two worlds, my love for Israel and at the same time my passion for the Labour Party, I was able to do that by working for the Labour Friends of Israel. And I was lucky enough to be able to take 70 Labour MPs off to the Middle East to see the Palestinians as well, because it's very, very important that British politicians get a real feel for what's going on in the region. And I've been very, very proud to do that, and I'm looking forward to the debate today.
Excellent. Well, it's a pleasure to have you both on the programme. David, firstly, I'll start with you. Israel has a very, very complicated political system. Thankfully, Israel is the only true democracy in the Middle East because Israel has multi-party elections. Can you explain a little bit more about Israel's system of government and her election? Because Israel's system's based on proportional representation and not a first past the post like we have here in Britain.
Well, this idea about political representation and about election systems was we had a referendum ourselves in this country not very long ago. It was part of the coalition agreement between the Tories and the Lib Dems. And but that's where the similarity ends, because even the biggest proponents of proportional representation in the UK look to Israel and do slightly wonder about that particular system. It is a very, very difficult system. Its origins grew up from the foundation of the state. I mean, the important thing about Israel is it is a democracy. You could possibly say that it's possibly too democratic, because the threshold is so low that the reality is if you get about 2% or about 3.5% of the vote, you will get a Knesset seat. So me personally, I'm not an advocate of the proportional representation, and the system in Israel is possibly the worst example because it does mean that it does create a very sort of fractious political environment. That said, everyone has their say, and the one thing you will know about Israel is that its media is open, its politics is open, it's a tremendously vibrant social democracy. Communications and the way that politicians interact with society, it's everywhere. It's all incumbent. It is a part of every person's life, and anyone that's visited the region knows that Israelis are glued to the news constantly in terms of what's going on. So, yes, the system of Israel is difficult to understand, but it is democratic, and it still remains the only democracy in the region.
And Salmi, as we look at some of the Israeli elections, particularly this election, and Israeli elections are known to be very lively, very passionate, where passionate issues are discussed, such as domestic policy and foreign policy. And also there's a very high voter turnout in Israel when it comes to elections. Why do Israelis care so much about politics, and why are they so passionate about politics?
Well, because politics in Israel is not about necessarily taxes and benefits and the kinds of things that we vex ourselves with in this country. It is about life itself. It is about survival. And Israel is, as to use the Arabs' terminology, a one-bomb country. And we don't get second chances. Therefore, we always have to make sure, and the people at the grassroots, no matter what their political stripe is, they need to make sure that they have the right leadership. But for me, we've talked about democracy and the freedom of the press, and perhaps that it's too free. For me, the beauty of this election, as every election in Israel is, that in this particular case, we have two ladies, Tzipi Livni, Sheli Yachimovitz, both going for the job of Prime Minister in a region where women are not allowed to drive in these other countries, in Arab countries. You know, I spend a lot of time in Jerusalem, and when I go to my synagogue on a Saturday morning, I see people going around in driving schools, taking driving lessons, Arab women taking driving lessons, and I'm sure you must have seen this many times, because they're not allowed to drive in these other countries. And in Israel, not only are they allowed to drive, they go to university, they have the vote, they have everything, but they can stand for Prime Minister. And there are a couple of Arab parties also challenging in this election. That is the great message. That is the flowering that is going on in the midst of this terribly troubled region.
And that's exactly the question I wanted to bring onto you, David, really, is the fact that Israel's enemies accuse Israel of being an apartheid state and comparing Israel to the likes of South Africa during the apartheid years, which is complete lies. And particularly because Israel's Arabs, who represent 10% of the population, able to vote in these elections and have representation in the Israeli Knesset, even if they are, many of them appear to be anti-Israel in the statements they make in the Israeli parliament. Doesn't that show how vibrant Israel's democracy truly is?
I think that anyone that makes that accusation against Israel, I think really exposes themselves, because any visitor to the region, even for a short time, anyone that looks at the vibrancy of the Israeli media will know what an absurd notion that is. I've been proud to be able to introduce Israeli government ministers from Israel and bring them to the UK Parliament. Many of those have been Israeli Arabs. Many of those have been Israeli Arabs. And that is a wonderful thing. Yes, there is inequality in Israel. Of course there is. There is inequality in every single country. But in Israel, you have, exactly as Zalmi says, a beacon of liberty and of freedom that you do not see in many hundreds of miles in any direction from Jerusalem. And the real proof of the pudding is the fact that Israel's Arabs, while they may complain about lots of different issues, many of which are justified, they would much rather prefer to be residents and citizens of the State of Israel than to be citizens of any other nation in that region. So I think that is the best argument you can possibly make against that absurdity. And I'm sure that when people say apartheid, either they are not very well informed, or there is something a little bit more sinister in what they're saying, because what they're trying to really do is delegitimize the only Jewish nation in the region. There are 50 Islamic states, 50 countries where there is a majority Muslim population. There is only one Jewish state. Just one. Yet that small piece of land continually faces this delegitimization with this accusation of apartheid. And I think the people that make that accusation, at best you could say they're ill-informed, at worst you could say it's something a little bit more sinister.
No, I very much agree with you, and that's why it's important that we expose the lies the enemies of Israel are telling. We've got a clip to go to now that looks at some of the key issues in this year's Israeli elections.
The Israeli election coming up seems to be making headlines on a daily basis in Israel. And the Knesset, Israel's parliament, is gearing towards the counting process and the upcoming forming of a new government and coalition, which will be facing many challenges in the months to come.
We have 4 challenges. 2 of them are going together: budget and social problems of Israel. The other problem is the conflict with the Palestinians and the idea of going with the Palestinian to the negotiation table, although it is up to the Palestinians. And the third one is the problem of what we call Chok Tal, which means serving in the army, the burden of every Israeli to serve his state according in equality.
Israel has always viewed itself as both a Jewish state and a democratic one. However, about 40% of Israel's population is comprised of the Arab and the ultra-Orthodox communities. These 2 sectors of Israeli society struggle with the idea of a potential constitution defining Israel as a Jewish state. And so sustaining a Jewish state at the same time as maintaining a democratic one often appears as a contradiction.
People will say that a Jewish state is a contradict to a democratic one, because if it is a Jewish state, why it should be a democracy? Because democracy goes only to the Jewish people, and we are here, 6 million Jews and 2 million Arabs, Christians and Muslims and Druze and Cherkess. So by definition, there is a gap, and the burden to prove that we can bridge the gap is on the Jewish majority, to say there is no contradict, there is no gap between a Jewish state and democratic one.
In the direct aftermath of the election, Israel's president will call upon all of the parties voted in for the Knesset, and based on their recommendations, he will task the leader of the party with the best chances of forming a coalition to do so. However, with Israeli politicians frequently shifting between parties and making various political declarations in recent weeks, the kind of coalition which will ultimately be formed is still a big question mark in Israel.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Salmi, what do you believe are the key issues at this year's elections in Israel?
I think the key issue is going to be the extent to which we engage with the Palestinian leadership in the face of total recalcitrance and total ignorance. Or when I mean ignorance, I mean ignoring all of the efforts that Israel has made. We went through a 10-month settlement freeze, and in the last week of the settlement freeze, they said, well, let's have another settlement freeze. It's this kind of going up a tree and not coming down that Israel is facing, and yet the left-wing parties feel that we should still be slicing away the salami and giving more and more concessions, a bit like throwing meat to a lion and hoping that he's not going to eat us, or better still, he's going to become a vegetarian. So therefore, I think that the issue is between the fantasists and the realists. I remember speaking to Yuval Steinitz, who's the finance minister under Benjamin Netanyahu. And over a cup of coffee, we were talking about, his, at that time, the upcoming election of that time. And he remarked during the meeting, don't forget, I was on the left once. I went from the left to the right. I said, no, you went from fantasy to reality. There are fantasies. The Oslo fantasists are still there. So that's the main issue. Yes, there is Iran. Yes, there are socio-economic issues. The divide between rich and poor is very vast. And there is also a huge problem with illegal immigrants who've crossed over the Negev border, who are causing a great deal of problem in South Tel Aviv. And there are major, major ructions in South Tel Aviv, social issues, law and order, and this kind of thing. And those things have to be addressed, and there need to be solutions, and they're looking for leadership to fix those solutions.
And David, what would you say are the major issues from your perspective that Israel's facing at this election?
Well, of course, the issues which Zalmi has mentioned about security are ever present in Israeli elections. But I think more than ever, the social issues are also very, very important in this election. The large demonstrations that we've seen in Israel about poverty, about rents, about the prices of food, those are very, very important issues. The amount of child poverty which exists in Israel does need to be addressed. Now, I think it's important that Bibi is able to address those issues, or whoever forms the Israeli government, because these are real issues affecting the Israeli people. Now, of course, every Israeli government is rightly fixated with the security of its people. That is the paramount job of any government, is to look after the safety of its people. But the issues of poverty in Israel are really quite acute now, and I think that any future government needs to address them quite urgently.
One of the, if I can just intercede, one of the new items, which is very, very much a hot potato, is the expiration of the Tal law, which exempted yeshiva students learning in the Talmudical colleges and seminaries from army service. Now that has expired, and the powers that be are really wringing their hands over a solution to this. They can't just conscript all of these people in one go. The army isn't ready for them. They're not geared up for all of the kosher and segregational and other dimensions that are needed for more religious soldiers. And the various parties have got different platforms on that.
Yeah, that's certainly an ongoing issue in Israel. Yeah. David, it looks very much that Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be elected for a third term, which is historic in Israeli elections. And it looks like he would probably be forming a coalition of the right. And we've seen, certainly in this election, the rise of the settler parties, particularly those of Naftali Bennett's party. It's called the Jewish Home Party. Why are we seeing a shift in Israeli public opinion more to the right? And what are the reasons why so many of these pro-settler parties are looking to gain substantial seats at this coming election on Tuesday?
Well, you know, look, I think it's not difficult to understand the rise of these parties. One simply has to look at the withdrawal from Gaza and what was faced by the Israeli people after that. Israel withdrew from Gaza completely to the satisfaction of the United Nations, and what it faced was rockets and terrorism. Now, that has had a huge impact on Israeli society, and Israeli people look at the result of that withdrawal, that effort for peace, that painful compromise which Israel made, and they say, you know, quite rightly to themselves, if we did the same in the West Bank, then, you know, would these missiles be falling on Israel's national airport, on Tel Aviv, on Jerusalem, on other major Israeli cities? So I think the shift to the right is very much a result of Israeli people's reaction to the terrorism which it's faced. I mean, ultimately, it is the terrorists that destroy efforts for peace every single time. Every time we move a little bit further in the peace process, which everyone wants to see move forward, Israelis and Palestinians alike, everyone wants a peaceful settlement, if it is at all possible. Every time we get closer, it's the terrorists and terrorism which defeats us every time, which is why it is so important that the Arabs and the Palestinian people get their house in order, because history has shown us that Israel gladly makes peace and is willing to be very bold in its efforts to make peace when there is a prize on the table, which is an absence of war, an absence of terror. As long as there is this constant threat facing the Israeli people will continue, and rightly so. I mean, it's a normal human reaction. Yes, we want peace, but of course, if there doesn't seem to be a partner willing to control terrorism, or tacitly agreeing with it, or actively supporting it, then the results must be protecting people's own families and their livelihoods.
Yeah, and David, are we seeing with this election in particular, as we've seen a shift in terms of Israeli public opinion? The settler parties look like they will form probably a huge component of Benjamin Netanyahu's re-elected government. Isn't there a great danger that Israel faces, that the Israelis are waking up to, is that a Palestinian state is unworkable and unfunctional, and all that Israel will face if she allows the creation of a Palestinian state is that one minute she signs a peace treaty with Mahmoud Abbas from Fatah, and tomorrow Hamas take over and Israel faces a militarized terrorist entity right on our doorstep.
Well, you know, the definition of madness used to be that you just continue to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. We have very, very clearly seen that every single piece of territory that we have given up has been taken over by Iran in whatever guise, whether it's Hamas, Hezbollah, you name it, whatever splinter group, has been taken over by them, not for a state, not for schools, not for any kind of cultural or business ventures, purely for rocket launching. This happened in South Lebanon, this happened in Gaza, and it most certainly will happen in the West Bank. And the 300,000 settlers who will form a very large voting bloc in this election will be making their message very, very clear about that. They do not want, they do not see a Palestinian state being anything different than what's happening in Gaza and South Lebanon. Another dimension of election dimension here is that if a year ago one might have said after the social demonstrations in Tel Aviv that the guys who were in the tents for all of those weeks would be a major voting bloc in the upcoming election. Well, I think in this election it's changed, because I think a major voting bloc in this election is now going to be those people who sat in shelters for weeks on end. And these are not leftists, not rightists, not settlers. These are just ordinary people who I think realize at a very deep level, Israelis, that the rockets that are coming in from Hamas is not because they want a Palestinian state, is that they want to remove the Jewish state. They want a one-state solution, and it's not a Jewish state. And this is a reality, this is a realism which is starting to germinate amongst even the secular leftists. And this is the reason why the right is getting more popular.
And we've got a clip to go to now that looks at some of the challenges facing what looks likely to be Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister's third historic election victory.
There is hardly any doubt about a victory for the Netanyahu-Lieberman coalition in the Israeli elections on January the 22nd. Opinion polls show Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's conservative Likud party and former Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman's nationalist Yisrael Beitenu winning around 35 to 37 seats in the 120-seat Knesset. But this is a sharp decline from the 43 seats they had shown in the polls just in October. There is a new candidate who's caused this erosion of their votes. Surveys show Naftali Bennett, an old Jewish settler and high-tech millionaire, chipping away at Netanyahu's lead, drawing support from his traditional power base. The head of the Bayit Yehudi party, who wants to annex parts of the occupied West Bank, was shown to be in second place with a predicted 18 seats. Netanyahu also faces challenges from the centre and the left. Former Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni has tried without success for now to join her centrist Hatanua party with the also centrist Yesh Atid and the Labour Party. Together they could get more than 40 seats. But the Labour leader, former journalist Sheli Yashimovich, has refused because she doesn't accept Livni's strategy. He proposes that if the centre-left bloc loses the election, it could join a government headed by Netanyahu to block the road to religious parties, as well as Naftali Bennett. Israel uses the closed-list voting system, so the electorate vote for a party and not an individual candidate. The seats are then given out proportionately to all parties who gain more than 2% of the vote. As a result of this, the government of Israel tends to always be a coalition.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Zalmi, just one of the rising stars of this election has really got to be, hasn't it, Naftali Bennett of the Jewish Home Party, particularly because he's proposed, according to my notes, that he is opposing the creation of a Palestinian state anywhere in the biblical land of Israel. And he says he wants to annex 60% of Judea and Samaria or the West Bank and make 50,000 Palestinian residents citizens of Israel. Why is he becoming so popular, and what does this mean for Israeli politics?
Well, I think a lot of the 50,000 citizens would be very happy, Arabs would be very happy to be citizens of Israel for the reasons why that David referred to before. He's popular, he's a fresh face, he's a self-made millionaire, he's son of American immigrants, so he's well-spoken, he's well-polished, he's very outspoken in what he says. And he's clearly coming in, as I say, on the heels of this rocket campaign. We've had Cast Lead and we've had the Pillar of Defense. So he's riding a wave here, and it's quite a phenomenal wave. Do people want him to be Prime Minister? No. I don't think that anyone wants him to become Prime Minister. What they want is they want Bibi Netanyahu to become Prime Minister, but they want somebody else pulling his strings. That's really the way I feel the Israeli politics plays out this way.
Now, of course, we don't know the makeup of this election because the Israelis haven't decided yet. They'll decide that on Tuesday, David. But if, which is the opinion polls are correct, and Benjamin Netanyahu, who actually becomes re-elected as Israel's next prime minister, he faces an overwhelming task of choosing who his coalition partners are going to be. Now, as we've seen a rise of the right-wing parties, the settler parties, particularly guys like Naftali Bennett, isn't there a great danger that this is going to create further isolation for Israel in Europe and in Britain? If you consider the hostility the European Union has towards Israel, expanding Jewish homes in Jerusalem, as they think this is the most important issue in the Middle East, ignoring the rise of dangerous Islamist groups across the Middle East that look to put the whole Middle East in a very, very dangerous and precarious situation. What do you think the impact of the makeup of the next coalition will have on, say, our parliamentarians here in Britain?
Well, if there's one thing I've learnt from my years on this earth and following this subject, is that Israel and the Jewish people have been alone through much of its history. And it's a you asked about isolation, and it's a phenomenon which we as the Jewish people, citizens of Israel, are quite used to. In fact, the Jewish people have never been able to really rely on anyone else in this world to help them out, which is why it is so gratifying to that people like you and the watchers of this program are willing to be supportive and stand up for Israel. Now, in terms of isolation, I'm not one of these people that believes that Israel should bend over backwards to make Washington happy or Brussels happy and or parliamentarians on the left of the Labour Party or some conservatives as well. I'm not one of these people. What Israel must do is what's right for its people. It must secure its borders, it must take its diplomacy forward, it must deal with all of the threats it faces, but at the same time must try its hardest to pursue a peaceful solution. Not for Washington, not for Brussels, not for Westminster, but for its own people. Now, very often, the advocates of, the most fervent advocates for the Palestinians in Parliament, I don't feel have the best interests of the Palestinians at heart. I think that they're more interested in slamming Israel. I think it's become a sort of a national sport on the left of British politics, and that's extremely regrettable. Israel must do what it has to do to support its own people, irrespective of pressures. Now, it is a difficult job to stand up to these pressures. Without a doubt, it's a very, very difficult job to do it. But, if one thing history has taught us is that no one else will look after Israel's security but Israel itself. And that's why I'm a believer that Israel must do what's right for them, rather than what is more convenient to President Obama.
Yeah. And Zami, do you want to comment on what
Yes,
David has said here?
I do wonder what we ever got for all of these concessions that were given. We did vacate South Lebanon, at great danger to ourselves. We did vacate Gaza at great danger and also at great pain. There was 8,000 people who were uprooted from their communities. There was tremendous trauma under which families and kids who were evacuated even as many years ago are still having counselling sessions. But it's just interesting when you talked about being alone and so forth. I've lived and worked in London all my life. I can only remember 2 occasions when it felt good to be Jewish. In terms of the Gentiles, when we were looked up to in this country. One was after the Six-Day War, and one was after the Entebbe rescue. And in both of those cases, we did what was right. We protected ourselves, we went out and got our hostages back, and we were daring and we were bold. We will always get credit, and we will be safer when we're daring and we're bold, doing what we need to do. But history has shown, and recent history has shown very clearly, all we get for the concessions is demonization, delegitimization, divestment, boycotts, and some of these divestment purveyors, and London, unfortunately, is the capital city of divestment and boycott, are so ridiculous. They know, these are academics, they know that they're talking rubbish when they talk about apartheid Israel. I mean, an Arab judge put the ex-president of Israel in jail. I mean, if you're talking about, did that ever happen in South Africa? So no, it is a joke, and the academics and the unions and so forth, all these leaders of the divestment movement know that it is absolutely untrue and it's a calumny. But they still do it to curry favor with the Arabs, and I think a large part of this goes back to the PLO, because they wanted the PLO go somewhere else and bomb somebody else's country, and we'll look after you. Yes, we'll criticize Israel. Yes, we'll do whatever you want, but just take your terrorism someplace else. And I think this was very, very much a protection racket, that we paid the protection money that Britain and France and Germany, to a large extent over those hijackings where they let the terrorists free, was all about paying protection money in the form of criticizing Israel. That is currency for the Arabs. You criticize Israel, keep them under pressure, and that's currency for us. That's good and valuable consideration.
So really harking back from the 70s with all the hijacking and the terrorist attacks all across London and Europe in the 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. And David as well, we've seen with this election, which is very interesting, really, the collapse of the peace movement. The groups like Peace Now, it looks like the left in Israel and the centre left are at war with each other. We've seen the fragmentation of the traditional party of government, which is the Israeli Labour Party. Why do you think that the Israeli public are becoming disillusioned with themselves, and why aren't we seeing any real leaders emerge from the left? We've seen the retirement, I think, this month of Israel's Defence Minister Ehud Barak.
Well, it comes back to the old point, which is that the majority of Israel's people are willing to make difficult concessions for peace, and they've shown that time and time again. So they really do. I mean, it's within the DNA of Israel's people to search for peace. I mean, the word shalom is the word shalom is one of God's names. I mean, it's part of the Jewish religion to constantly search for peace. So there is a willingness to take the peace process forward. If there is a viable partner that we can do a deal with, I mean, that is the most important point. If the border of Israel turns to be 7 miles away from Tel Aviv, and that is used as a base for terrorism, I mean, that is simply unacceptable. That is simply unacceptable. And, unless there is a realistic chance of us making a deal which is sustainable with our Palestinian partners, then the Israeli left will continue to have difficulties, gaining support. Now, that said, the Labour Party probably will do better than it did last time. And I think that's largely down to the point about those social protests, about the inequalities within the Israeli society, about poverty, which is an important point which the next government needs to work hard to address. But it will never get to the way it was as long as there doesn't seem to be a likely opportunity for a peace deal to be brokered.
We've got a report to go to now that looks at the surge to the right amongst the Israeli electorate.
Jewish settlers in the West Bank city of Hebron are confident that Israelis will vote for the right in the upcoming parliamentary elections. Opinion polls forecast that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will win a third term in office. But the settlers are concerned that the premier could opt against a right-wing coalition.
This time it seems that the right is getting stronger. The country is moving right. I mean, we see that all the time. There's no doubt about that. However, that does not necessarily mean the Prime Minister, following his re-election, will decide to form a right-wing coalition. He can go to the left. It's very difficult to know where Netanyahu will go. We hope and expect, because there are many people in the Likud that are very strong right-wing, that he will form a right-wing coalition. But I won't believe it until I see it.
The Hebron settlers may be drawn to support the pro-settler Bayit Yehudi, a natural ally of Netanyahu's Likud party. Bayit Yehudi is forecast to become the third largest faction in parliament. Its head, Naftali Bennett, is calling for peace and unity, saying that 60% of the West Bank should be annexed to Israel and Palestinians living in that part should be given Israeli citizenship, with the rest to be given autonomy.
First of all, before we go about annexing, we have to reverse Israel's position and the world's position vis-a-vis forming a Palestinian state. And only then very gradually apply Israeli law on the Israeli parts of Judea and Samaria. I think sometimes common wisdom is wrong. I think this is one of those cases where we're all together on a bus, the whole international community, riding towards a dead end. How many missiles do we have to endure in order for the world to wake up and see that what we've tried time and again is not working? Maybe it's time for a new approach.
Elections for the 19th Knesset are due to be held in Israel on the 22nd of January.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Salmi, I just want your views on what you feel the next makeup of the next coalition government will be if Netanyahu is re-elected, which I believe it will be.
Well, as you saw in the clip, Bennett, he has a lot of good things to say, and I think he has a role and he has a contribution to make. But I don't think it's necessarily a foregone conclusion that even if he becomes the second largest party, and that is a possibility, that it will automatically be the case that Netanyahu will go into coalition with him. History has shown that Netanyahu has reached out for a centrist party. And he will not necessarily want to be totally reliant on Bennett's party, so that during the next round of negotiations over, let's hope not Jerusalem, but certainly in the West Bank, because let's face, we do not want to control Nablus. We don't need to control Nablus. Nablus is a very thriving community. He will not want to have Bennett's sword of Damocles over his next government to say, right, we're leaving, and then to cause a government crisis, and then allow somebody else to form a coalition of the left. So I think, depending on how things settle in terms of how many mandates are obtained by Likud Beitenu, they will probably try and reach out to the middle ground first, and then trying to present to perhaps to President Obama a more open and reasonable platform, notwithstanding the security imperatives which everyone is going to have to sign on to.
And also, Dave, we want to bring you into this one as well. What do you think the makeup of the new coalition government could look like?
Well, another thing I've learnt about Israeli politics and all politics in general is never predict the outcome.
Very sensible. But I'm a journalist, so I think I should ask these questions.
Sure. Look, I mean, without making a prediction, one never knows what will happen. Politics in the UK and in Israel is a lot more fluid than it used to be. Party association, growing up as a member of a party, a whole family units being a member of a party. I mean, we know that from our own families and here in the UK. That party loyalty is gone. So it's an open book in terms of what will happen. Whatever happens, I think that all politicians in Israel have taken off their rose-tinted spectacles, which they had back in the heady days of Oslo and at Camp David with Ehud Barak and Yasser Arafat. Those days of turning the Middle East, Israelis and Palestinians, into some sort of Switzerland or Luxembourg or some sort of peaceful Norwegian haven are very much gone. Something which Naftali Bennett says, which I happen to agree with. The reality is that this conflict is going to continue for the foreseeable future. Perhaps there isn't a final settlement possible, but we must be able to, both Israelis and Palestinians, improve each other's lives so that we can get on with our lives and do the things which are important to us, which are, raising our own families and following our faith and leading lives separate from terrorism, because this armed conflict is absolutely going nowhere. And sadly, as we all know, right, left or centre in Israel, there is no military solution to this particular conflict. So, whatever happens to the Israeli government, I think the rose-tinted spectacles are very much off, but we do need to learn how to live with this conflict and get some sort of normality into people's lives in the region.
We've got a clip to go to now, and this is the remarks by President Obama that he believes he knows what's best in terms of Israel's interests, and how he's now been rebuffed by the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has made a thinly veiled attack against Barack Obama after the US president was quoting as criticizing Netanyahu's character and his ability to determine his country's best interests. With less than a week before the general election, Israeli media highlighted a US commentator's column on Obama and questioned whether the US president was trying to sway the vote. But during his visit to an army base near Gaza, Netanyahu appeared to chide Obama without mentioning his name. Netanyahu said that only Israeli citizens will determine who loyally represents the country's vital interests, adding that the country had faced tremendous pressures in the last 4 years. Obama and Netanyahu have been at odds over Israel's settlement building in the occupied West Bank and heavy Israeli hints over possible military action against Iranian nuclear facilities. Opinion polls suggest Netanyahu will easily win the election, scheduled for the 22nd of January.
Welcome back to the Middle East Report. Gentlemen, I think we've got probably down to around 5 minutes left of the programme, so I think we need to sum up. But Sami, I want to bring you into this one to really just reflect on the issues raised with that clip, and particularly the very difficult relationship that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has with President Obama. It's not going to be easy for the Israeli Prime Minister with newly elected President Obama.
I think basically that all goes to sharpening Netanyahu's wits. Clearly, there's no love lost between them, and that it's sad. But Obama is someone who, after being re-elected, really believes he is all powerful. But I think we all know that a different power guides what happens in the Middle East. Israel is a miracle. It should not ever have survived after 2,000 years and been rebuilt in such a magnificent way. It defies all the laws of gravity, logic, politics, and so forth. So Obama will come and go, other presidents and prime ministers will come and go, Israel will go on and thrive. But the most important thing is that it must be under strong leadership which believes in itself and believes in its divine destiny in its homeland.
I say amen to that. I fully agree with that. And David, how can Christians really stand up for Israel and the Jewish people? And I think it's important that Christians move away from a theological understanding of Israel, keep that as the centre, but also reach out to the Jewish community, reach out to Israel. And thank you for your kind compliments during the programme. I think it's only our duty that we stand up for Israel and the Jewish people, and it's something I'm passionate about and something that we've got to fight for because we're fighting for truth.
Well, there's a fairly simple thing which they can do, actually. British members of Parliament, having worked inside Parliament for close on 20 years, they are affected by their constituents. When constituents write to them, contact them, go and see them, make appointments to go and see them, they are affected because they are our representatives in Westminster. And I think that Christians, Jews, even Muslims, people of any faith and none, should, if they feel passionate about this subject, and I would encourage them to feel passionate about it, should contact their member of Parliament and go in to see them, go and see them in their surgeries, write to them and tell them the way you feel. Tell them the way you feel, because British members of Parliament don't really get a feel for the passion there is across the country. Away from the heartlands of where the Jewish community live in Britain, but across the country where people live. They don't get a feel for the way which Christians feel about this subject. And Christians need to make their feelings about Israel and about its security, about their hopes for peace, but at the same time, their willingness to encourage Israel to take the necessary steps it needs to take to defend itself. So contact your member of Parliament, write to them, email them, let them know how you feel. That is if you feel passionate about this subject, that is what you should do.
And Zami, we've seen that Israel has gone through a lot, certainly since the last Intifada, facing that horrendous, what can only be described as a terrorism war against Israel with the horrendous suicide bombings. We've seen the further isolation of Israel in terms of world public opinion. And yet what's emerged from it, I believe, is much stronger support for Israel from evangelical Christians really wanting to reach out and strengthen Israel and the Jewish people. How important is it that that continues and that the relationship between the Christian and Jewish community is strengthened in the cause of Israel?
I think the Christian community, in terms of their visits to Israel and their support on Israel proper, is wonderful. In this country, as we're speaking from London, I think the best thing that Christians could do is become more active in academia and in the media and on these NGOs and in places like War on Want, which are charities which are supposed to uphold other things besides Palestinian statehood and protest about the separation wall, as they call it. I'd like to see more Christians getting active in there and actually outing what they're doing and bringing some truth into the debate.
And Zami, if all goes according to plan and Benjamin Netanyahu is re-elected, are you organising a big party for your Likud members here in London?
We're certainly going to be having a live election night with the Zionist Federation, but I hadn't planned on any parties, perhaps a drink at home.
Absolutely. And also, David, I think we're down to the last 2 minutes now. I mean, you look like an inspiring politician yourself. So any plans you've got of going into Parliament and representing the Jewish community?
Well, you put me on the spot here. I don't know the answer to that question. We'll see what happens. I mean, right now I've thankfully just had a baby 4 months ago.
Oh, congratulations!
I've got 2 other children, and I think my most important thing I can do is make sure that they're raised in a proper way before I have any ideas about political ambitions. So, I think it's family first and then politics second. But at the same time, I'm very passionate about this subject.
That would make you a good politician. I think someone who's gotten the priorities wrong. Anyway, gentlemen, we finished the programme. I just want to thank you so much for being my guests, and I'd very much like either you both to appear back on the Middle East Report or individually throughout the year. So thank you very much.
Very happy, thank you.
Thank you for inviting us, and thank you again to your Christian viewers who are so forthright in their support for Israel. It's very much appreciated by all the Jewish people and everyone living in Israel.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. And just want to thank you all for watching today's Middle East Report as we've looked at the Israeli elections. And it's important to remind ourselves how isolated Israel is becoming internationally in the European Union, here in Britain, and also in the United States. So that makes us more important in terms of our role and responsibilities towards Israel and the Jewish people. So let's stand up for Israel. Let's engage with our politicians and our elected representatives to tell the true message of who Israel really is and the dangers that she faces, because she is a modern miracle, and we just have to continue to pray for the peace and the protection of Israel and pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So I want to thank you all very, very much for watching today's program, and also let's pray for this election, that God would choose the right leader to lead Israel during these very difficult and dark and dangerous times in Israel and Israel's neighborhood. So thank you for watching. I will leave you with a song called Hatikva, which is the Israeli national anthem. And let's all remember what an incredible, beautiful and amazing place Israel really is.
Ayin lezion Sophia Od lo avda tikvateinu Hatikva bat shnot alpayim liyotam chofshi be'artzeinu Eretz Zion v'Yerushalayim liyotam chofshi be'artzeinu